Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. And today, we're lucky enough to have Joel Primus, author of the book Getting Naked, which I love that name, The Bare Necessities of Entrepreneurship and Startups. Joel, welcome.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, thank you for writing such a great book. I really enjoyed it. So before we go into the book, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Oh, do you want the short version or the long version?
Well, we
I
have an
mean,
hour, and I still want to cover your book.
my background is actually in athletics. I was a long distance runner. I represented Canada internationally. I had a full ride scholarship down to North Carolina. And then I ended up rupturing my Achilles and I lost my scholarship. I lost my place on Canada's world team. And so I had to reinvent myself. And as part of that reinvention, I went on a journey around the world that led to finding the underwear that became the premise for the book, Getting Naked, as well as, oh my goodness, I've filmed multiple award-winning documentaries, consulted for many businesses, mostly in the consumer product goods space, which is my favorite space to play. And I recently moved to a farm and we live a very different life now. I still do a lot of business work. I just wrote my second book, but we're farmers. How's that?
Good going from farm to table, that's for sure. In fact, as I mentioned to you, I live here in Hanoi, Vietnam, and I've lost, I'm so now used to metrics, 10 kilos, so 20 pounds since I've been here.
Yeah.
Same exercise. I work out 7 days a week. I walk 10,000 steps a day on top of the exercise. But because everything here is fresh and there's
Yeah.
no preservatives,
Yeah.
uh, that's the only difference in my life is the lack of preservatives.
I, having been there myself many times, produced much product in Vietnam. Uh, the one thing I noticed right away was the bloat went away. With that inflammation in my stomach that I get when I eat, when I travel in the United States, gone, no matter how much I eat. And the food is the best in the world in Vietnam. And it's so clean.
Yeah, that's for sure. So let's talk about, why did you write this book?
Oh, many reasons. You know, it's the book is dedicated to a gentleman by the name of uh, Cameron Webb, who passed away. And he was an investor in my company, Naked Underwear. And one of the reasons I wrote the book was I wanted to put him into something that was meaningful for him. The other reason I wrote the book was when I was starting my first business, I had so many questions, and I felt like everything I read in the business realm was very high level, and or it missed the sort of pain, suffering, and the stuff that happens to you as a human being, the growth you go through, the struggle you go through as a human being, really in real time. So I wrote the book in real time as I took my company from a startup that was on, if you're in the United States, it's called Shark's Tank. In Canada, it's called Dragon's Den. I went on that show all the way to taking the company onto the NASDAQ and divesting the company to a large Australian company. So the book was written along that whole journey in an attempt to make it kind of real and visceral for the reader who is in their business and thus relatable, combining the personal lessons with the business lessons.
So tell us a little bit more about your friend that you wrote this book for.
His name's Cam Webb. He was a very successful entrepreneur. He was a world traveler, and in fact, while we're on the subject of Vietnam, um, that was where I met him. We were both
Oh,
Canadian.
wow.
We were both Canadian, but we ended up in Southeast Asia at the same time and became very close friends. And when I came home, he preferred the blue collar business route, and he started a. Uh, I fondly think about those blue collar businesses versus the pie in the sky ones that I tend to start because he was very successful, and he had a family of two girls, and he had a heart condition that he never told me about. Uh, and one day he was on a business trip driving from Seattle to Portland. And his heart stopped, and he died in the United States. And he had these two girls, and I wanted for them to have something one day, just to see, their dad. He's in the book in a few different places, and the movie that I filmed called Raising Global Citizens after I sold Naked. Cam is also it's also dedicated to Cam, and they were just things that I thought, hey, one day when his girls grow up, they'll see that their dad was a pretty cool guy, and that was why one of the reasons I did it.
And how many years ago was that?
I believe he passed away in 2015.
Well, it was nice to keep his memory alive. I'm sure his daughters greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, it's I mean, I have three girls. I had two at the time, the same ages as his, and I couldn't even imagine what that would be like.
I've got two daughters as well. They're adults now, 34 and 31, which I keep thinking I'm their age. I can't believe I could be
I know that feeling.
that old.
I know that feeling, Mark.
So let's jump into the book.
Sure. Yeah.
In the first chapter, you discuss the importance of having a clear vision before launching a business. Can you describe your own personal process for developing that vision for Naked, and how did your experiences in Peru specifically contribute to it? Now, I loved Peru, by the way. I'd been there 6 times working for Wharton.
The question I'm always asked is, was ayahuasca involved in the
Yeah.
vision? And the answer was no. I was very naive when I went to Peru the first time. I didn't know what ayahuasca was, but I have this belief. It's the name's eluding me of who wrote about it in her book, but the book is called Big Magic. It's a great book. And Big Magic, she writes about how she believes that ideas, they sort of float around and they land on someone and they kind of whisper in your ear, do you want to pursue this thing? And there's so many different ways you could take that literally, you can take that spiritually. But when I was in Peru, I bought this pair of underwear from a street vendor. I'd been traveling for 4 months and I needed some new underwear. And I didn't know that Peru had incredible Pima cotton. And so I was blown away by this unbelievably soft cotton that was so much nicer than anything my mom had ever bought me when I was growing up. But then I hiked up Machu Picchu and I was wearing the product and I didn't like how it performed. And so almost in an instant, I had this idea where, and maybe it was the magic of the Incas, I don't know, but I had this idea where I said, how do I take the best of the things, the fabrics I was used to as a runner that perform really well, and marry them back to this new fabric that feels so luxurious and create something so comfortable, no matter what you do, no matter where you go, you can't feel it. And oh my gosh, I'll call it Naked. And that was it. And I went back to the street vendor and I bought all these pairs and I just threw them in the bottom of my bag and I never touched them until I got home. And so, to answer the question specifically, ideas, they start very small, but there's always this clarity in some aspect of it. And for me, it was this idea of a pair of underwear that would be so comfortable you couldn't feel it. And then that becomes your call to adventure, as I'm sure many people on this call know. The idea that when you have this vision, you make the choice to seek this thing, you then are led on an adventure. And you have no idea what's going to happen on that adventure, and who you're going to become. And so you just make that choice and you keep that little light at the end of the tunnel, which was, I'm going to make this thing. And it's your guiding light through all the ups and downs as you go through it. And it's not rock solid, what's going to happen, but that end point is yours and yours alone, and you should always hold on to it. And so for me, that was that. And we did it.
But you didn't do it for the money. I mean, wouldn't you say that most all entrepreneurs don't start a venture with the idea of getting rich, but they did it because they're interested in whatever they've started?
I see, that's what I believe. I know that there's a stigma sometimes, right? Because I mean, we're all in this world. We see all the billion-dollar exits and how much Elon Musk is worth. You know, Elon Musk might have done it for the money, but Elon Musk, if you look at the industries in which he has decided, he's not going to try to go, he's not trying to go to Mars for the money. He will be dead before all those billions come into fruition. And he risked almost all the money he made on his first business, PayPal, in order to start Tesla. And he's risked unbelievable amounts of capital in order to start SpaceX. And so I believe that, yes, just like that, entrepreneurs have this, they answer this question of first why, and then why not? Why not make this thing? See what happens. And it's a way of experiencing life. There's so many ways of experiencing life. Travel, you're in Hanoi, been to Peru 6 times. But one of the ways of experiencing life is saying, I'm going to try and build something and I'm going to see what happens. And if money comes, awesome. Awesome. It sucks not to have money. I know, I know what that's like. But really, it's about curiosity and exploring your curiosity and what you as a human being can create in this world.
And don't you think that's what keeps you going during the downtimes? Because in the beginning, there are a lot of downtimes as an entrepreneur. And if you don't really believe in the mission, it's just like being married. You've got to really love that person.
You're absolutely right, Mark. There's so many downtimes. I sometimes people say I'm a bit depressing to talk to, but I'm a realist and I say that there's so much struggle in bringing something into the world. There's so much resistance that if it doesn't feel like it's a part of your purpose to be here, then there's so many reasons to throw in the towel every week, every month. And that's not just in the beginning. It's hard all the way through. Your problems change, your challenges change, your struggles change. You know, when you're young, there's no money. It's hard to start a business. It's hard to get people to believe in you. Then maybe you have a family and you're trying to balance what it means to be a father or a mother while pursuing your purpose, and there's struggle there. Your company grows and you have human resources struggles. There's always struggle. So the mission has to be the guiding light for you.
I agree with you totally. Without that mission and your belief in that mission, you're just not going to make it. You're going to drown.
You will drown.
You emphasize the need for open-mindedness and learning when pursuing a vision. How did you stay receptive to new ideas or feedback while maintaining your focus on the original vision for Naked?
That's a good question. You know, I have a tendency to be myopic at times, and I've been accused of that. And there's something healthy about myopathy, but if that's the word, but you there's a Wayne Dyer quote that says, you know, be open to everything and attached to nothing. And as an author, there's a popular saying, you know, you have to be willing to kill your darlings. And so over the years, how I have balanced between this has always been a bit of an ebb and flow. And it kind of comes down to one thing. You have to know yourself. You have to know your biases. You have to know your blind spots, and you have to understand when you're making a decision, as it is to like pursuing this vision blindly or openly. What is informing the this decision? Where are those blind spots? How do you correct for them if you need to? And when do you say, no, I'm going to stay the course? And when you are choosing to stay the course, the main filter for myself is, am I willing to be wrong? Am I okay with saying, I'm going to do this, and if I'm wrong, that's okay. If I miss the mark on it, that's okay, because I'm just going to keep going anyway. And so that's the thing. You can't be afraid when you're sticking to your vision. You can't be afraid of failing. You can't be afraid of falling on your face with that very vision. And somebody saying, I told you so. And you're, you know what? You did tell me so. And I'm going to course correct now.
You mentioned the significance of being shameless and resilient in the face of rejection when pursuing funding for your ideas. Can you share a particular experience where you overcame significant rejection and how that impacted your belief in your vision? And as an entrepreneur, because I've done 30 startups, man, you've got to really get used to rejection.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
I mean, you eat rejection.
You eat it for breakfast. Even if
Yeah,
you're successful, you eat it for breakfast.
all the time.
I mean, look, politics aside, look at the president of the United States elect, Donald Trump. All he eats is hate. And he's the president, right? And Elon Musk, his backer, like, they eat so much criticism. To this day, he's the most wealthiest man on the planet, right? There is it, and this changes as the phase of your business changes. Again, going back to that hero's journey, that Joseph Campbell call to adventure, the idea of saying, I'm going to figure this out. They call it being a beginner's mind, right? The transforming fool. You have to be willing to be foolish before you can be of knowledge and of wisdom. And and that's a really hard path to follow, because there's a lot of safe places you can hide today. You can hide in a job that doesn't challenge you. You can hide behind a different moniker or username online and not really ever put yourself out there willing to be heard. But I always found that never really moved the needle very far. And you had to really step out. And so the first example I'll use is an example from the book where I went on the Dragon's Den and the Shark's Tank. And I wasn't ready. I had 5 prototypes. I had no business to speak of. I had no business experience to speak of. And I got this phone call from CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Network, that had heard of my story. They're like, "Oh, this kid, he's good fodder. His company's called Naked. We'll get him to strip down into his underwear and come on national TV and ask for a deal." And I thought, wow, that's a great opportunity. With no mind of, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Well, one of the dragons, he called me delusional. Excuse me, I might sneeze here. Um, he called me delusional. He said, "You have no clue what you're doing." And I remember it being like the experience of asking a girl out and being rejected in front of your friends, but on national TV, whilst standing in my underwear. And it was humiliating. And then millions and millions of people watched me be called delusional. But you know what also happened? A lot of people didn't care what that guy said. And this guy's got some courage. I like that idea. Let me hear his story in a more full capacity. And I was able to leverage that risky moment into other good moments. But, just to wrap up on that point, I probably had 1,000 no's to invest in Naked, and I raised $17 million. So I had to go through 1,000 rejections, and I'm not exaggerating, over the course of many years to get there.
Was there any time you were surprised that they rejected you? Like you felt like, I've got such a great story and these people still, and was most of the rejections that they didn't buy into what you were doing, or they didn't buy into how you valued the company?
Well, there's a few things I've learned along the way. Some people just want a free lunch. And that's one of the reasons they reject you, right? I've done a lot of what you would call road shows, non-deal road shows, where deal road shows, where you go around and you host these luncheons and you bring investors in. And you know what? Most of them are just there for something to do. They're there for the free lunch. And so you kind of have to say, okay, get rid of nine out of 10 people at the table because they're just here for the free lunch. And other people I've found, because I've done a number of angel where you compete against other startups in an angel forum environment, and there's hundreds of VCs and private investors there. And some people in those environments, they just want to hear themselves talk. They just want to sound smart. And so you're up there presenting, and then they'll make some offhanded, terrible comment about your stupid idea or how you don't, there's no practical sense in it. And so over time, you start to realize that so many people are just coming at you with their own biases and their own perspectives and their own place they are in life. And they're not really there to hear what you have to say. And so you have to really filter through that, because it can really bog you down. And you really just have to then double down on the people who you believe or who are there because they see something in your idea as well. And those people are hard to find. You got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince or princess, if you will, in that scenario. And you have to remain optimistic whilst also adjusting your pitch and everything you're doing as you're going, because sometimes people do have valid points, which is another question we can get to, is understanding the difference between your belief in your idea and what it is that an investor actually wants. Now, do you want me to just jump right into that one, Mark?
Yeah, of course.
So one thing I learned through these 1,000 pitches early on was that as much as an investor might like your idea, it's not your dream that they're investing in. It's their own dream, their dream of making money. Because while you are pursuing this thing and it's maybe not all about the money, an investor is investing in you for the money. That's what they want. They have a dream of getting their 10x deal, right? Striking it rich, or if they're already rich, becoming richer. And so you have to frame what it is that you're trying to sell them, this piece of your company, in a way that helps them understand how they can actually make money. And I know that sounds quite simple, but when you're there pitching this idea, oh, this underwear company is going to be so big, it's like, well, okay, great. The underwear company is so big. How do I make money in that? Am I making money because we're doing a rev share, a profit share? Are you selling the company? Are you taking the company public and I will find liquidity? And so being very clear about how this deal is structured to return and provide them a return on their investment is very key. And you would not believe how many pitches I have sat through, people pitching me, where that is not even in the deck. There's no point in which they say, here's when or how you might get your money back in this deal.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I probably went 2 years before I realized that.
I run the Angel Venture Fair in Philadelphia, where I bring together entrepreneurs and angel investors. And you're always telling the entrepreneurs, you got to show the investors how they're going to get their return. Like they just didn't want to give you the money and say, have a nice life. Now,
Yeah.
it's kind of weird. Once in a while, I'll have an investor that will push back against the entrepreneur who does tell them, here's the exit strategy. And they say, why are you worried about an exit when you're just getting started?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's pretty rare. I mean, most all investors want to know who is the likely buyer of the company. Nobody's thinking about you ever going public. It's mostly about who could potentially buy you.
Well, that's a really good point, Mark, because it hits on the aspect that you still have to have a fundamental business for it to be sellable. That's one. Two, angel investors, venture capitalists, they also understand that the reality that the business that you were pitching them and how it is that you've presented this business, how it's going to work, how you're going to exit it, all of that's probably not going to happen. And it's going to go on this completely different tangent. Or it's going to, sorry, not tangent. It's going to follow this completely different route and become this completely different thing. A classic example is Instagram, right? Where Instagram started to what it became. But what it shows when you present all these things is at least you're thinking about it. You're thinking about it, and thus you are showing the investor that you, the entrepreneur, the jockey of the horse, or the jockey that they're betting on, is thoughtful in how they're thinking about this business. And thus, if things change, which they inevitably will, this entrepreneur has the capacity to rethink the plan, to adjust the strategy, right? No plan. What's the famous War General Marshall's statement? No plan survives, first contact with the enemy. So you plan
Yeah.
scenarios, right?
Well, it's like Mike Tyson saying you get punched in the face and then the whole game plan
That's
changes, right?
exactly it.
Yeah.
Exactly it. Exactly it.
Yeah, all the time when you're talking to entrepreneurs, especially first-time entrepreneurs, and they show you their financials the first year, and you go, well, you'll be lucky if you achieve half of what you said, and those expenses, you way underestimated them.
Yeah.
and you tell them, and all the startups I've ever been in, I found that's always to be true, that your
Yes.
expenses are twice as much and your revenues half the amount. And then
Yeah.
you learn everything in the first year, and then you're able to make adjustments in it.
Yeah. Oh man. It's so true. It is so true. And like that's again, it's about the thought. When somebody in a startup asks you for your financials and your projections, it's a thought exercise. It's assessing how this entrepreneur thinks about his business because as you said, everything's going to change and it's probably going to be wrong. And
What kind of investors did you look for? Like, what was the profile of the ideal investor for you?
that's a really good question. Because that has been something that's changed for me over time. Um, because some investors over time, let me rephrase that. Over time, I have tried to become more strategic with aligning myself with investors who I actually think can add value to my business. So investors who actually understand the space in which I'm playing, the sandbox I'm in, because it is so challenging to start a business that the more quality people you have in your corner, as long as everybody's rowing in the same direction, the greater chance you have of aligning with the right contacts, navigating difficult situations, all of these different things. So ultimately, now I try and align with investors that both understand the industry in which I'm playing and have, to at least some extent, shared values with myself. Uh, I don't like to get into politics and religion with investors, and it almost never happens. But people that you like to be with every single day, people that you don't butt heads with. And I know that sounds very much like common sense, but when you're a broke entrepreneur and somebody's dangling a check in front of you and that person's an asshole, and you kind of don't know they're an asshole, but you also kind of think they might be an asshole,
Your gut tells you this.
right? Your gut tells you this.
Absolutely.
It's very hard to say no to that money. Uh, and I know there's many times in which I haven't, and almost 100% of the time I've regretted it. And so initially, it was just, hey, do you have money? Okay, great, you're a candidate to invest in my company. And now it's much more about who is that person? Do they understand this space? And do all these different energies align? And that's not a perfect formula because it just doesn't always end up that way. But I certainly endeavor to do that.
Yeah, I think so. I think you want investors who can open doors for you, not ones who are sitting around the boardroom critiquing you all the time about what you're doing wrong. They're not very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
In chapter two, you detail the challenges and setbacks you faced during your early pitches for Naked, particularly during your appearance on Dragons, which you were talking about earlier. What were the key lessons you did learn from that experience, and how did that shape your approach to future pitches and business opportunities?
Well, this is a question we addressed a little bit, which is understanding that what the investor's objectives are as you're pitching that investor, understanding what it is that they want, what makes them tick. Um, are they a short term? Are they a short term money person? Right? Because some people don't have a long liquidity horizon, right? Liquidity being, when they can realize either a gain or get some of their money back if it's a loss. Um, and so adjusting the pitch to the person I was pitching. Not to say I've adjusted the entire business, but looking at it differently. For instance, if I'm in front of somebody who has a short-term uh, liquidity horizon, well, then it might make a lot more sense for me to pitch them maybe a convertible debt note in which there's a repayment term on it from revenue versus saying, hey, look, over the next 10 years, this thing is going to get bought by XYZ company. And they might not be in a position to sit for 10 years on that capital, or they might not want to, right? So really just doing a little bit of due diligence on the person, if you can, ahead of time to understand how it is that they might want to interact with your company and then adjust the pitch accordingly.
You mentioned the importance of taking small steps and significant leaps when pursuing your entrepreneurial vision. How do you determine when it's right to take the leap versus to focus on making smaller and incremental advancements?
Well, it's really both. There's a great, I just heard Mark Andreessen say it. It's a story. So Mark Andreessen Horowitz, they're one of the biggest VC firms in the world. Actually, they are the biggest, I believe. And he was recalling a story where it was when Elon was in the process of buying Twitter, or early days, maybe not yet actively acquiring it. And there was a sort of interim CEO who was dealing with a lot of challenges at Twitter. Jack Dorsey had left. And Elon famously posed the question to him, like, what did you do this week? And it's a really in the tech world, things tend to happen very slowly. There's a very oriented nature to Silicon Valley. And so this idea of like, what did you really accomplish this week was kind of a jarring challenger kind of question. And it really comes into these small and big steps. When you look at, we can feel busy, and busy doesn't mean we're actually doing anything. It just means we're staying, we're responding to emails and we're staying busy because it makes us feel like we woke up with something to do. And so I like to think about that when I think about these small and big steps. And the small steps are consistency. And consistency isn't your inbox being empty. Consistency is every single day showing up and doing something that moves the needle inside your business. It's not a big hero win. It's just something that actually moves the needle, right? That's picking up the phone, making a sales call that you don't want to make. But the big steps, this is the part that's much more challenging because it changes with time. And I always say, you need to be thinking about what could potentially 10x your business, because that's the CEO founder's job. You can have, as you grow, all the people inside the business that also just do the components that grow the business. But the CEO's job is to continue having that big vision of what could really move the needle, right? And so I like to think about take time to think about that. And I apologize, Mark, I'm taking a long time to answer this question, but it's important. Going on to a show like Dragon's Den, that could really move the needle. And it's worth taking that step. Getting sold a marketing package by somebody that drains the treasury, you got to, it doesn't necessarily move that needle 10x, and it's a big step. So what I like to do, to just bring it down to brass tacks, is this goes back to having good people around you to say, when I want to take those big steps, run it by some people that you respect, both in the business and outside of the business, who think, you know what, that is a big giant step you can take. And I'll give you an example. This past year, I went on Japan's Dragon's Den, right? And I mean, completely absurd, but everybody unanimously was like, well, that's a why wouldn't you? That's a big step. Why wouldn't you? That's a leap. Who knows? But why wouldn't you go on Japan's Dragon's Den and see what happens? So it's really just about, I wanted to go from the hop when I got the offer, but I ran it by a lot of different people to make sure that I wasn't just too excited about it.
I wonder this. There's many times investors are always looking for what's your competitive differentiator. But when you think about a lot of the great success stories, they really didn't have much of a competitive differentiator. I mean, Google came, 15? There was a 15 or 18.
There's 18.
Super financed
Yes.
competitors in that particular space. Facebook, there was Friendster and MySpace, and people probably were telling Mark Zuckerberg, there's already two well-established players in this space. Why would I put money into you? And I wonder, like in venture capital, they look at 1,000 and 2,000 deals, only invest in 10, and only 1 out of 2,000 is actually hit. what are these guys missing, or like, why does that happen, considering that they're went to the best schools over years, they get tons of experience? Why so many failed? That it's really, you could throw a dart against the board and guess better than they have.
That's unbelievably accurate. And one of the most frustrating things about pitching is that investors always fall back on this playbook that they themselves know to be bullshit,
Yeah,
completely and utterly untrue. Because your biggest competitive advantage is not the white space in which you are playing, the blue ocean in which you are swimming, the patents around your strategy or your business. I mean, Elon Musk famously said, he doesn't believe in moats, right? Moats being the protection, because a moat will only protect so long against an invading army. It's about innovation and execution. That is what makes the difference between a successful business and an unsuccessful business 100% of the time. You might get a
is
win. Sorry.
isn't that what we're seeing play out with SpaceX and Boeing, right? I mean, in what, 10 years, Elon Musk has taken over the aerospace industry, and Boeing is on the outside. Somebody that's been around, what, 80 years, 100 years, Boeing has been around, all the major contracts, all the contacts,
Yeah.
everything. And now their product is not working out well. The satellites, everything is going to SpaceX. And
Yeah.
and that's his company, because Tesla, right, was founded by two other guys, and he just happened to grow Tesla. But SpaceX is his baby from the get-go.
Yeah. You're bang on. I mean, the private sector without bureaucracy and without these I would call it old ways of thinking, but in the box type ways of thinking. Become NASA. Look, you mentioned Boeing. Look what he did. Look what NASA's done versus what SpaceX has done. It's not even comparable, right? And you have taxpayer dollars. So I just, I chalk it up to fear being one. At the end of the day, people still fall back onto the thing that makes them feel safe, i.e., the investor blueprint, because there's this sense of responsibility. Like, I am doing the responsible thing by following this blueprint, and it's just human nature. I find that human nature comes through. It wins. It's evolved for so many thousands, millions, depending on how you see the history of the world, years. And it's hard to break. It's hard to see that, um to break that pattern in yourself, as again, as an investor. And I think that the school system, the education system, does a terrible job of that as well. I think it trains you to think in case studies when all case studies are based on the past. And if if you're not thinking about, well, Marc Andreessen talks about how his job is to predict the future when he's making investments. It's not about looking at what worked for General Motors, because that's not going to matter in an AI world. And yet so many of these people, these very, very brilliant investors, keep falling back onto that old way of thinking. And that's where there needs to be a shift. And I think that shift has happened. I think AI is the inflection point of every, investor saying, oh, whoa. you know,
That's changing. I think that is the most game-changing technology of my lifetime, is AI. Because now McKinsey, BCG, all of these consulting firms, all the young people coming out of college that work for them now have no real jobs, because they were doing all the research. Now you can just go on to
chat.
ChatGPT or MindPal, which comes out of Vietnam, and you immediately get those information that was taking them months. I mean, I use it all the time in class
Yeah.
to create all these different things that I'm doing, and I'm just astounded about how much time it saves. And you have to double check the accuracy on some statistics,
Yeah.
but it's even that they're getting better and better
For now,
at giving
yeah.
you the best information.
What's so interesting about the AI stories, though, it's been around for 25 years, but
Right.
it's only had its leap in the last five, four,
Yeah.
three, really. And now it's leaping faster and faster and faster. And so, again, somebody who was investing in that 25 years ago, even if they were just investing their time, it's like that was not a profitable return, but somebody could see the future, right? And know that this thing really could. And so the fundamentals weren't there. The technology wasn't even there to support it, the infrastructure, right? Which is the whole game right now, is building the infrastructure that can even run AI. It's not even the algorithm so much as it is the ability to power that algorithm. And so that's, again, just to bring it back to the point is seeing the future is really where, and being willing to fail, but knowing that you're not actually going to be any different predicting the future than you are trying to remodel the past in your in the investment, because the success rate is still about 1 in 10 anyway.
Yeah, but that still astounds me. Like, you're backed by Andreessen Horowitz, and they've got all the contacts in the world. They're super experienced entrepreneurs themselves. They've met the best entrepreneurs of the past half century. Everything that they've got going for them, and still, like, you would think that they can make almost every company at least successful. Maybe not a home run, but at least successful, and yet still, and they're
Yeah.
investing in super smart people themselves. It just, I can never wrap my head around it.
Well, it's one of my business partners said the takeaway from that is don't feel bad if you
Yeah,
fail.
yeah, of course.
Even at any point, for instance, to share a story, and I know we're kind of digressing from the book here, but we were talking about a business that we just raised some money for. And we're talking weeks. And you take that money to survive and try and grow. And then in weeks, you're facing doomsday for some reason. And my partner says to me, go look at the list. I can't remember where it was, of all the companies who took money and within 3 months were shut down. He says, you're not alone in this, but that doesn't mean you don't take the money. You always have to endeavor to succeed and push forward. And a professional investor will understand that. And you're not in bad company if you can't make it work. But if you don't try, well, why were you in the game to begin with?
That's what I tell my students all the time. Um, You emphasize the importance of establishing a clear why for your business. Can you share any specific strategies or techniques that helped you or your team at Naked clarify and communicate the why to both your employees and stakeholders effectively, especially the kind of business that you were in?
Yeah. It's funny. It's never been something I've been very good at because as a sort of romantic, I that why is always very broad. And my heart goes to, well, now our why is to build schools in Africa. And so bringing this distilling, synthesizing this idea of your why into a business is is kind of twofold. One is your personal why. Why are you doing this thing? Why are you sacrificing, in a way, so much of your life, blood, sweat, and tears to this thing? And that doesn't have to be because there's some there's some human component that you're or human issue that you're solving for with your business or with your idea. Making the world a better place is sort of the easiest why to think about. But when it comes to your business, you have to be able to take that and 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 distill it down to an essence in which a consumer can understand in a very simple beat point. And the best way to do this is, for instance, use an example of Tom's one for one, Tom's shoes, which had a very,
Yeah,
it's a classic example. I apologize, it's not better, but the idea of oh, well, we're putting shoes on people who don't have them, one for one. And that was so sticky because it was so easy to understand. And I've always found the only way to get there is to run your whys or why by people who have absolutely no interest in your business to see if they can get it like that. Because if they can't, that why is never going to translate to the customer if you want it to, right? And the other thing I, I've learned over time is maybe your why, and since writing this book, doesn't matter in the sense of trying to save the world. Maybe you make a really nice T-shirt, and that T-shirt people like wearing because it looks good on them, and that's enough, and that's simple enough, and so it's really about that, is simplicity.
In your experience, how do you balance the pressure from investors or retail partners to make changes that may compromise your brand's core values with the need to secure their support and sales? And you kind of talked about that in the beginning about taking on investors that, hey, you need the money, but your gut's telling you otherwise. Can you share an instance where you navigated that challenge?
I can share an instance where I navigated it poorly to start. When when we had this great product, underwear made in Italy, sorry, Italian fabric made in Canada, and we had this very loyal following. And we sold Nordstrom's, and Nordstrom's bought the product. And after the first, they hadn't even shipped it. And then they asked us if we could reduce our price points into, so we were sort of selling in the $40 range. They want us to be in that sort of $28, $32 range. And I said, well, that's where most of the customers shop. I exerted a lot of pressure onto us to do that. Well, the only way that we could do that was make the product in China versus a North American made product. And I acquiesced. I did it. And all of a sudden, the whole ethos of the brand was stripped away instantaneously. Customers, well, what was made in China? Like, I can go buy 10 brands. I can go buy 1,000 brands that make underwear in China for 30 and sell it for $30. I was buying you because you did something different. And it hurt the business. We obviously had to adjust and grow, but it really hurt the business. And I vowed at that moment never to do that again. And so one of the simple ways is to not put yourself into positions where you do have to compromise the brand. And so how I've adjusted it with, my own companies or companies that I advise is, listen, you might want to sell Nordstrom's, and Nordstrom's might even be interested in your product today. But don't sell Nordstrom's until they're buying you, and you're in such a position of power, and there's enough demand that that they're not going to drive these changes. They're not going to hit you up for the 25% off 4 times a year sale because you don't believe discounting is part of your brand ethos, right? It's having the patience and the fortitude to hold out on decisions that would degrade what you're about until the time is right. I mean, that's something that is very practical, is just waiting and aligning yourself with the right retailers and points of distribution. And e-commerce wasn't around. It's very much at the beginning of my business. So that obviously lends itself now to maintaining some of that power. But that's one way, one example.
I have an example for you that was very interesting. When I was at Wharton, I worked in the consulting group, and we worked with a company in Chile, and the company sold pork, and Walmart wanted to buy from them, and they turned Walmart down. They said, we're going to put you in all these stores. You're going to be triple the size you are now. They said, yeah, but you're going to want to beat up our margins to where we're barely making a living. Like, yeah, we're going to do a bigger volume, but it's not going to be good for us. And so they told Walmart, we're not interested. And I said, how'd you end up turning down Walmart? And they go, we have an algorithm that tells us when pork is in demand in different parts of the world, when there's a flood or whatever happens. And we only sell to those parts of the world where we can maintain a 25% margin. So when big retailers, supermarket chains contact us, we tell them, this is the price. If you don't want it, that's okay.
Yeah,
And I
that's
think that
okay.
was like, that was a real learned lesson about having the discipline to say no when even your investors would be like, oh my God, you got to take it. It's Walmart. You've arrived.
Yeah, you've arrived lie. The
Yeah.
arrival, it's called arrival fallacy is what it's called, right? Where you think that the destination is something very different than it ends up being. And in most scenarios, my own experience included, when I've done the thing I shouldn't have done, when I arrived, too early, sold Nordstrom's too early, those relationships, those almost always get undone. In the end, it took 3 years, and I ended up pulling my product from Nordstrom's because they just kept trying to dictate the brand. Um, and it just didn't work.
Yeah. And lots of people fall into that fallacy. When you are investing yourself in entrepreneurs, what's the profile that you've learned from your own experiences that you feel have the best chance? Not that it's guaranteed win, but have the best chance.
It comes down to the entrepreneur, right?
But what do you look for in that
Yeah,
entrepreneur that tells you I think this gives me a great chance to get a good return?
yeah. Well, if they're a first time entrepreneur, it's a little bit harder. And for better or worse, the decision making has to do with, can I see myself in this person, in the sense of, a lot of people helped me and I want to help people. So there's a bit of a philanthropy, charitable component to it. That is not fundamental. It's not good sense. It's just, you know what? I'll give this person a chance because I got chances. And so that's how I would do that. But when you're talking about somebody who's a little bit more seasoned, I do a very deep dive of their historical successes and failures, more their failures. And I really want to understand how I don't want them to, this is really where it comes down to. I don't want them to tell me about all the good things that happened in their past businesses, because I know that probably 95% of that is bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to do a highlight reel for your business. I want to know all the bad stuff that happened. I want to know the reality of those businesses. Did they really sell for what they said they were going to sell for? Did they really, were they really in to the example we just used, Nordstrom's? Or was it a situation like mine where in Nordstrom's it was a very tough relationship, of sacrifice and the degradation of the brand, etc. And if I can get a really good sense of the failures and how they handled those, and I have this picture that is grounded in reality, that gives me a sense of how they're going to operate this new business in the face of all the challenges that they're going to have. So that's my focus point, is if they're not willing to give me any of these failures, if they're not willing to, in a Donald Trump, double down on the lie kind of thing, never admit your faults. If they're not willing to give me any of that, don't get me wrong, I understand the value in that position, but if I can't see it, the dirt, I stay away. And
Oh, I
that's
agree with you. When I
yeah,
teach my students, I tell them about all my failures. I rarely talk about the successes, always about the failures.
yeah,
And they like it. They feel it's more authentic and they
yeah,
feel they get more out of that. And I feel like I learned more from that than you ever, because you have no idea why you did succeed, but you
yeah.
can take a look at the failures. Here's a question from the audience. Do you think these days majority of investors are still looking for sexy AI and digital based startups like the next Airbnb or Uber, or that it's not true anymore? And what advice you have regarding capital raising for a small company, which is a local business and needs funding for growth? And there's more to this question, but I figure I should stop there and then
Well,
let's
yeah,
answer
well,
that.
two questions. The first answer is, yeah, I don't think we're done. I think the best way to look at that AI is look at what is the infrastructure that is needed to support AI? Where are the holes around AI? We have the chats, we have that. Um, that's going. Where are the places that people within that sector are not currently playing? Uh, because that's where money's going to flow. If you're talking about literally the infrastructure of the world being remodeled to AI, that leaves a whole bunch of things that are AI adjacent. You might not be inventing the Terminator here, but it's having a sense of all of those different things, and there will be so much money that flows into all of these different AI adjacent sectors over the next.
So I think they're also asking here, is there opportunity if you're not part of that? Like if you're not
Oh,
in AI and
sure.
these things, do you just, put your stuff in your trunk and drive off, or is
No,
there?
no, that brings it back to the very first point is you're not doing it to just play where everybody's playing it. You're doing it because you have something that you want to say. You have something that you want to explore, and you have something that you believe that the world needs, and that is enough. There is never one thing. There's never. It's just that's the one thing that's in the media. People are raising money for every single type of sector you could possibly believe. In product, I see every week. It comes across my desk. So no, just that's just what's popular to talk about. But the world still goes on. People still need new underwear or they need new whatever's, right? And so no, don't look at that and think that that's representative of everything.
Here's the second part of this question. We have
Yeah.
another question from someone else as well. Should the approach for finding investors be different when you compare traditional and brick and mortar business to techie businesses? And if yes, what are your top tips and advices?
Well, yeah. I mean, your approach should be a little bit different because um, maybe I'll give you this example. When I did the angel forums, so I did the West Coast ones, Koretsu. I'm sure you're familiar with them, Mark.
Yes. Yep.
And then Koretsu Koretsu's not just West Coast, but they're Seattle based. And then there was a whole bunch of other forums that sort of follow. I would say that forum cost me money. I had to pay to play. It was $15,000, which a lot of VCs vehemently disagree with that startups should be paying to join these forums. And so the reason I share that though is the whole experience cost me, I'm going to say 30 grand to pay the fees for these different presentations, get into their funnels, and then do the road shows. And what I found was that I would say 98 to 99% of the investors in those forums only invested in tech. And I had an apparel company. And so that was the wrong place to be for me. I had not done enough due diligence research to understand that was a waste of money. And so it should not have been the approach to go raise money. I should have been looking to successful apparel companies, big and small, that might be looking for, to invest in different spaces to grow their businesses, who might be in need of an asset. I should have been looking elsewhere, and so doing good R&D about where you're going to invest, maybe your cash if it costs money, because everything does, and more importantly, your time is really critical because you can end up really going down a path that is not ever going to be fruitful for you. That was the first part. The second part was something to do with I missed it, Mark, if you could refresh me.
Yeah, the second part of that was, if yes, what are your tips for advices for folks who are in the brick and mortar business?
Brick
To
and
raise.
mortar, as in it's like a store.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is that the store business is really interesting in that it's kind of blue collar in a way. And there are lots of people actually who get excited about that, but you don't have to go look into the skyscrapers of the offices at the top of the skyscrapers of New York and Chicago for the money for those businesses. There's a lot of people inside the local communities that are interested in putting their money to work. And I've found some success through local chambers of commerces. If we're talking about literally, again, I don't have a ton of context here. We're talking literally about a mom and pop shop, and using that as the way of then casting a net that's much more localized to where your business is. Because if there's somebody in the community, they might want to see businesses in that community flourish, and so there's money that's going to flow. And I have seen in small towns many groups of people who've made, groups of lawyers, groups of doctors, groups of dentists who like to put their money into things that they can touch, feel, see
There's a
in
lot
their
of people
community.
like that. Yeah.
Right? Lots of people who have 20, 30, $40,000 to throw at something. And it's not going to, freak them out. Um, but to get to know those people, you kind of have to go through the top of the channels in your community. So I apologize. I'm sure that wasn't a great answer to your question, but if I understood the business maybe a bit more, I could elaborate. Or happy to also, Mark, if anyone has any questions, you can just email me the questions and I can, opine a bit more.
I will definitely do that. Joel, I can't believe the hour has gone by already. I could have sat with you for hours talking about this subject, and sometime I'm going to bring you in, at least by Zoom, to speak to my students in Vietnam, because I think they would really enjoy your perspective and your experience. And I thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I apologize. I know we didn't get through the whole book, but um, I really did appreciate the opportunity. I think we're very kindred. We shared a lot of similar war stories and experiences and lessons we've pulled from it.
Everyone who's asked me about Joel's email, if it's okay, I'll send them your email.
Yeah, let me send you a different email, like a general one
Yeah,
that I will
yeah,
respond to.
yeah.
I get a lot of mail, but I've made that open to everyone here. So, and I'm happy to support. I promise you, this is not a lead funnel. I'm not trying to sell anybody anything.
Yeah,
So
I'll send it to them when I send the link to the video, and that would be great. So send that to me and I'll make sure they get that.
perfect.
Thank you so much for taking the time.